The wind screamed across the frozen plains of Kepler 442b like a wounded animal that would never stop crying. And Commander Elias Vance sat alone in his underground hideout, listening to the storm tear at the world above him. He had lived here for 3 years now, forgotten by the human military that had once called him a hero and then called him a traitor. Abandoned on this frozen rock at the edge of known space where the Draconis, Imperium and humanity had been killing each other for generations. His crime had been simple, and he would commit it again if given the chance. He had refused to fire on a refugee ship carrying civilians, even though his commanders had sworn the vessel contained enemy soldiers. And when the ship had been destroyed by another officer following orders, Elias had found only the bodies of families floating in the debris. They had not court-martialed him because that would have required admitting what they had done. So instead, they had simply erased him, posting him to this dead research station with no support and no contact and no hope of ever going home. He survived by scavenging technology from old crash sites and trading with smugglers who passed through the system. And he had become very good at being alone. The storm outside grew worse, and Elias checked his sensors out of habit, expecting to see nothing but ice and wind and the endless darkness of an alien winter. Instead, he saw fire falling from the sky. His screens lit up with impact warnings as something massive and burning tore through the atmosphere 3 kilometers to the north, and the ground shook beneath his feet as the object struck the glacier with enough force to crack the ice for miles in every direction. Elias stood frozen for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities. A meteor would not burn that color, and human ships did not carry that kind of heat signature, which meant only one thing: a Draconis vessel had crashed on his frozen little world. Every survival instinct he possessed told him to stay underground and wait, because the Draconis were not creatures that inspired mercy or compassion in anyone who had seen what they could do. They were massive, dragon-like beings whose bodies were fused with biomechanical technology that made them living weapons. And they had been at war with humanity since before Elias was born. Their fire could melt steel, their claws could tear through armor, and their culture viewed humans as vermin to be exterminated whenever convenient. Elias should have stayed in his bunker and let the cold finish whatever the crash had started. Instead, he pulled on his thermal suit and grabbed his emergency kit and headed for the cargo sled he had built from salvaged parts. Because somewhere in the howling darkness, something was dying, and he could not make himself look away. The journey through the storm nearly killed him twice. But Elias had learned to navigate this world's tantrums, and he reached the crash site just as the winds began to calm. The Draconis cruiser had torn a massive wound in the glacier, its burning wreckage scattered across a crater of melted ice that was already beginning to freeze again in the deadly cold. Elias moved through the debris carefully, scanning for survivors, even though he knew he should be scanning for threats instead. He found bodies, 3 Draconis warriors killed on impact, their massive forms twisted and broken among the metal ruins of their ship. And then he found her. She lay in a hollow of twisted metal that had protected her from the worst of the crash. A Draconis unlike any he had seen in military briefings. Her scales were dark silver with patterns of deep blue that seemed to shift in the light of his torch. And her wings, which should have stretched 3 meters on each side, were shattered and hanging limp against her back like broken promises. But what caught his attention was her flame core, the biomechanical heart that all Draconis carried in their chests. Visible now through a crack in her damaged armor, it flickered weakly, barely producing any light at all. And Elias knew enough about Draconis physiology to understand what that meant. She was dying. Her eyes opened as he approached. And even dying, she was terrifying. Those eyes were vertical slits of gold swimming in pools of molten amber, and they fixed on him with hatred so pure it seemed to generate its own heat. She moved, or tried to move. her clawed hand swiping toward his throat with the last of her strength. But her body betrayed her, and she collapsed back against the wreckage with a sound that might have been pain or might have been rage. Elias stood very still and watched her try to kill him again, and again, until finally she lay gasping in the snow. Her flame core flickering so weakly he could barely see it. "Are you finished?" he asked. She hissed something in her language that was almost certainly an insult. "Good," Elias said. "You can try again when you are not dying. But for now, shut up and let me work." He did not know why he said it, and he did not know why he meant it. But he found himself kneeling beside her and examining her wounds with the same clinical focus he would have given to any piece of broken machinery. Her wings were destroyed beyond any repair he could manage here, and her biomechanical implants were failing one by one, and her flame core was consuming itself in a desperate attempt to keep her alive just a little longer. She would be dead within the hour if he left her here. Elias looked at her. This creature whose people had killed millions of his kind. This warrior who had tried to tear out his throat even as she lay dying. This enemy who would certainly kill him if she ever regained her strength. And then he started loading her onto his cargo sled. She was heavier than he expected, her biomechanical components adding mass that made every movement a struggle. And by the time he had secured her to the sled, his muscles were screaming and his lungs were burning from the cold. "If you try to kill me on the way back," he said, not sure if she could even understand him, "I will dump you in the snow and let you freeze, understood?" She said nothing, but her golden eyes tracked his movements with an intensity that made him uncomfortable in ways he could not name. The journey back to his hideout took 3 times as long as the journey out, and twice he had to stop and check that she was still alive. Watching her flame core flicker like a candle in a hurricane, when he finally dragged her through the entrance and into the warmth of his underground home, Elias stood looking at her for a long moment, wondering what he had just done. He had brought an enemy into his sanctuary, a predator into his den, a dragon into the only safe place he had left in the universe. Her eyes opened again, weaker now but still burning with that golden fire. "Why?" she whispered, and her voice was like gravel and honey and the distant roar of flames. Elias considered the question carefully and found that he did not have a good answer. "Because you needed help," he said finally. "And I was there." She stared at him as if he had spoken words that made no sense in any language she knew. And then her eyes closed and her flame core stuttered, and Elias got to work trying to save the life of someone who would probably end his own the moment she was strong enough to try. Sirithkal woke in chains. They were not cruel chains, not the burning restraints her own people used on prisoners, but simple straps of woven fabric that held her arms against her body and prevented her from moving. She tested them once, twice, and found that she could probably break them if she truly tried. But the effort would cost her energy she did not have. Her flame core burned low in her chest, lower than it had ever burned before, and she could feel her body struggling to maintain even the most basic functions. She should be dead by every law of Draconis physiology. She should have frozen in that wreckage or burned out her core trying to survive. But instead she was alive and warm and lying on some kind of padded surface that smelled of oil and metal and something else. She could not identify the human appeared in her vision, carrying a container of liquid that steamed in the cool air. "You are awake," he said, his voice carrying none of the fear she expected. "Good. That means the thermal blankets are working." Sirith tried to summon fire to her throat, tried to burn him where he stood. But nothing came except a weak puff of smoke that made him raise an eyebrow. "Your flame core is running at about 12% capacity," he said, setting down the container and pulling out a device she recognized as a basic medical scanner. "You try to use fire right now, and you will probably die. So maybe save the murder attempts for when you are feeling better." She wanted to kill him for his arrogance, for speaking to a voidwing as if she were some injured pet he had found in the snow. But she could not deny that he was correct. She was weak in a way she had never experienced before. "Why have you not killed me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human looked at her with an expression she could not read. "I told you already," he said. "You needed help. That is not a reason," Cirrus said. "I am your enemy. My people have been hunting yours for centuries. You should want me dead." He shrugged, a strange human gesture she had seen in intelligence reports but never understood. He said, "But wanting and doing are different things. And I have never been very good at killing people who cannot fight back." He returned to his work, checking her vital signs with his scanner and making notes on a device she did not recognize. Cirrus watched him with the intensity of a predator studying prey. Except she was not sure anymore which of them was which in the days that followed. She began to understand just how strange this human truly was. His name was Elias, and he talked constantly, not to her but to everything around him. He spoke to his plants, small green things growing under artificial lights, asking them how they were feeling and apologizing when he forgot to water them. He talked to his machines, cursing at them when they broke and praising them when they worked, treating them like living creatures that could hear and respond. He sang while he cooked, terrible songs with no melody that made her ears ache, and he laughed at jokes he told himself. And he raged at broken equipment with a fury that seemed completely out of proportion to the problem. Cirrus had been trained from birth to control her emotions, to channel everything into the flame that burned at her core. But this human seemed to feel everything at once, without any filter at all. It should have been weakness. This constant flood of feeling that humans carried with them everywhere. Instead, she began to realize it was something else entirely. Elias worked on her wings with a patience that astounded her, spending hours each day stitching the torn membranes back together with surgical thread and some kind of engineering sealant that smelled terrible, but seemed to work. When she asked why he was wasting his resources on an enemy, he looked at her like the question made no sense. "Your wings are beautiful," he said simply. "It would be wrong to let them stay broken if I can fix them." No one had ever called any part of her beautiful before. Draconis valued strength and power and the ability to destroy, not beauty. And she did not know what to do with the strange warmth his words created in her chest. Her flame core grew stronger each day, fed by the heat of his shelter and the strange food he gave her that tasted wrong but seemed to work. And she began to move more freely around his underground home. It was a maze of human technology and stolen Draconis components. Hybrid machines that should not have worked but somehow did. And she realized that Elias was not just a soldier or a survivor, but some kind of genius who could make anything function if he tried hard enough. She asked him once why he lived alone on this frozen world, and his face did something she had learned to recognize as sadness. "I refuse to kill innocents," he said. "My people do not forgive that kind of disobedience." She did not understand, because disobedience in Draconis culture meant death. But humans apparently had other punishments that were somehow worse: exile, loneliness, being forgotten by everyone who had once mattered. She found herself feeling something she had no name for, something that made her want to stay close to this strange creature who had saved her for no reason she could comprehend. Then her flame core failed completely. It happened in the middle of the night. A sudden darkness in her chest, as the fire that had burned inside her since birth simply went out. She made a sound, not a roar but a whimper, and Elias was at her side in seconds, his scanner showing readings she knew meant death. "No," he said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before, a desperation that seemed to burn as hot as any Draconis flame. "No, you are not dying. I did not drag you 3 kilometers through a blizzard to watch you die in my living room. He grabbed the knife and cut open his own palm without hesitation. Blood welling up red and warm, and before she could ask what he was doing, he had pressed his bleeding hand against the crack in her chest armor, where her flame core lay cold and dark. "This is stupid," he muttered. "This is so incredibly stupid. But every stupid thing I have done so far has worked." So maybe his blood touched her flame core, and something happened that neither of them could explain. Draconis physiology should have rejected human biological material violently, should have treated it as a poison to be burned away. But instead, her flame core seemed to drink in his blood like water poured on dying embers. Fire exploded in her chest. But it was different fire, warmer and steadier than anything she had felt before. And when she opened her eyes, she could see Elias staring at her with an expression of complete shock. "What did you do to me?" she whispered. "I have no idea," he admitted, his bleeding hands still pressed against her chest. "But you are alive. So I'm going to call it a win." She reached up and wrapped her clawed hand around his, not to attack but to hold. And she felt his pulse beating against her scales in a rhythm that somehow matched the new fire burning in her heart. Something had changed inside her. Something fundamental and terrifying and wonderful all at once. And as she looked into the eyes of this impossible human who had saved her life twice now, Cirith began to understand that she was no longer the warrior she had been before. She was something new, something that had never existed in all the long history of her people, and she had no idea what that meant for either of them. The retrieval squad came on a night when the aurora burned green and purple across the frozen sky, and Elias knew they were coming before his sensors even detected them, because Cirith suddenly went very still and lifted her head like a predator catching a scent on the wind. "My people are here," she said. And there was no joy in her voice, only a cold certainty that made Elias reach for his weapons. He had spent 3 years learning everything he could about Draconis technology, studying their frequencies and their blind spots and the arrogance that made them predictable. And his sensors confirmed what Cirith already knew: 5 Draconis warriors were approaching from the north, their heat signatures burning bright against the frozen landscape. And they were not moving like rescuers. They were moving like hunters. "They are not coming to save you," Elias said, understanding immediately what this meant. "No," Cirith agreed, her new flame burning hot in her chest. "They are coming to kill me. A void wing captured by humans is an abomination. And my flame core is broadcasting readings they have never seen before." She turned to look at him, and her golden eyes held something he had never seen there before. "You should run," she said. "I will hold them off while you escape. You have done enough for me already." Elias laughed. And it was not a kind laugh. "I did not drag you out of that wreckage and spend weeks putting you back together just to abandon you now," he said, pulling out weapons and equipment he had been saving for emergencies. "Besides, this is my home. I am not running from anyone." Cirith stared at him in a way that made him uncomfortable. "You would fight your enemy's enemy to protect me," she said. "That makes no sense." "Very little about me makes sense," Elias admitted. "I thought you had figured that out by now." They had perhaps 20 minutes before the squad arrived, and Elias used every second of it. He activated defense systems he had built over 3 years of paranoid preparation. Turrets and mines and electromagnetic traps designed to slow down anything that tried to breach his hideout. Cirith watched him work with growing amazement. "You have been preparing for this," she said. "I have been preparing for everything," he replied. "When you have nothing but time and broken technology, you learn to be ready." He handed her a weapon he had modified from Draconis components, something that should not have worked but did because Elias refused to accept the word impossible. "Can you fight?" he asked. Cirith tested her wings, still healing but stronger now, and felt the new fire burning steady in her chest. "I can fight," she said. and there was something fierce in her voice that had not been there before. "I will fight for you as you fought for me." The first Draconis warrior breached the outer perimeter 3 minutes ahead of schedule, and one of Elias's mines took off his left wing in a burst of flame and metal. The warrior screamed and fell, and Elias noted with satisfaction that his modified explosives worked exactly as intended. "That will make them angry," Cirith warned. "Good," Elias said. "Angry enemies make mistakes." The remaining 4 warriors came fast and hard, their flames lighting up the frozen night as they burned through his outer defenses with the fury of a people who considered themselves invincible. But Elias had studied them for years, and he knew their weaknesses better than they knew themselves. His turrets targeted their exposed joints and sensor clusters, not trying to kill but to slow them down and frustrate them. His electromagnetic traps disrupted their biomechanical systems just long enough to throw off their aim, and when they finally breached the inner door and came face to face with the human who had caused them so much trouble, they found not a frightened vermin, but a warrior who knew exactly what he was doing. Elias fought like no human they had ever seen, using their own technology against them, exploiting gaps in their armor that their own engineers did not know existed. He was faster than he should have been, smarter than they expected, and completely unafraid in a way that confused and enraged them. But he was still only human. And when the squad leader, a massive Emberwing named Korath, finally cornered him against a wall, Elias knew his luck had run out. Korath was 3 times his size, his flame core burning with the fury of a sun, and his voice was the sound of mountains breaking. "You have killed my warriors," Korath growled, fire gathering in his throat. "You have corrupted one of our own. You are an insect who has forgotten its place, and now you will burn." Elias looked into those burning eyes and did not flinch. "Maybe," he said, "but I will die knowing I saved someone worth saving." "Can you say the same?" Korath's flame erupted from his throat, a wave of destruction that should have reduced Elias to ash in an instant. And in that moment, Cirith threw herself between them with a scream that shook the walls. Her own flame burst forth to meet Korath's. But it was different, so different that even she did not understand what was happening. Instead of clashing with his fire, her flame wrapped around Elias like a living thing, shielding him completely from harm while the inferno raged around them. When the fire died, Elias stood unburned, protected by a cocoon of silver-blue flame that came from Cirith's outstretched hands. Korath stumbled backward, his eyes wide with something she recognized as terror. "What have you become?" he whispered. "Your flame. It does not burn him. It protects him. This is heresy. This is impossible." "Apparently not," Cirith said, and her voice carried a power she had never possessed before. "Apparently, there are more possibilities than our Imperium ever imagined." Korath fled. The remaining warriors followed him, too horrified by what they had witnessed to continue the fight. And Cirith collapsed as the strange protective fire faded from her hands. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, holding her weight easily despite her size, and carried her to the medical bay he had set up in one corner of his hideout. "You saved me," he said, his voice rough with emotion he did not try to hide. "You saved me first," she whispered, her flame core flickering but stable. "Many times. I was only returning what you gave." She looked up at him with those golden eyes, and there was wonder in them now instead of hatred. "I understand now," she said. "Your weakness, it is not weakness at all. You bend, but you do not break. You form connections that make you stronger. You care for things beyond yourself, even when it costs you everything." She reached up and touched his face with her clawed hand, gentle in a way she had never been gentle before. "It is a different kind of power," she said. "One my people have never known. One that might change everything." Elias smiled down at her, and there was warmth in his eyes, that matched the new flame in her chest. "Well," he said, "I guess we had better figure out what to do with it." Above them, in the stars, Korith's damaged ship limped toward home, carrying news that would shake the foundations of the Draconis Imperium. A human had stood against their finest warriors and survived of Voidwing's flame had chosen to protect instead of destroy, and something new had been born in the frozen dark, something that could not be burned away no matter how hard they tried. Word spread faster than fire across dry grass, moving through the communication networks of two civilizations that had been at war for longer than anyone could remember. Among humans, the story grew with each telling until it became legend. A man alone on a frozen world had saved a dying dragon, healed her wounds, and fought beside her against her own kind. And when the enemy's fire had come to destroy him, the dragon's flame had become a shield instead of a weapon. Refugees heard the story and passed it along to resistance fighters, who whispered it to smugglers, who carried it to colonies on the edge of known space. People began asking questions they had never asked before. If one human could change one dragon, what else might be possible if fire could protect instead of destroy? What did that mean for everything they thought they knew? Among the Draconis, the story spread as heresy, but heresy, once spoken, could not be unspoken no matter how hard the Imperium tried. Korith's report sent shockwaves through the highest levels of Draconis command, and they tried to suppress it, tried to silence everyone who had heard, tried to pretend that what had happened on that frozen world was a lie or a trick or a malfunction in Korith's own systems. But the truth was too big to contain young Draconis warriors, tired of endless war that consumed their lives before they truly began, started asking dangerous questions. If a human could heal a Voidwing's flame core, what else might their strange little species be capable of? If a Draconis flame could choose to shield instead of burn, what were they really fighting for? A philosopher caste Draconis named Thessaly the Quiet, who had spent her life studying the ancient texts that most of her kind had forgotten, became the voice of these questions. She did not call for revolution or rebellion, but simply asked her students to consider that perhaps the universe was larger than the Imperium had taught them to believe. For this crime, she was marked for death. Instead of waiting to be killed, Thessaly gathered those who thought as she did, and fled toward the coordinates that every Draconis had been warned never to seek. The frozen world where heresy had been born. She was not the only one who came. Elias had never wanted visitors, and he certainly had never expected his hidden bunker to become a destination. But the ships began arriving within weeks of the battle, and they did not stop. First came human refugees, people fleeing the war zones and the military authorities who had abandoned them, seeking the man who had proven that survival was possible, even in the darkest places. Then came resistance fighters, soldiers who had grown sick of following orders that led nowhere good, looking for a different way to use their skills. Then, impossibly, came Draconis. Thessaly's ship touched down on the ice 3 months after the battle, and Elias stood beside Cirith as the philosopher emerged with her followers, their scales glinting in the pale light of an alien sun. "We have come to understand," Thessaly said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had traveled very far to ask very important questions. Cirith stepped forward, her wings now fully healed and shimmering with that strange silver-blue light that marked her as something new. "Then stay," she said. "Stay and learn, and teach us what you know in return." The community that grew from that moment was chaotic and violent and beautiful, all at once. Humans and Draconis, who had been killing each other their whole lives, learned to share food and shelter and knowledge. And it was not easy, and it was not peaceful, but it was something neither species had ever experienced before. Elias found himself at the center of it all, not as a leader, but as a builder, creating systems that allowed different kinds of life to coexist in spaces designed for neither. He built hybrid heating systems that kept humans warm without overheating. Draconis, He designed communication networks that translated between languages that had no common ground. He solved problems no one had ever tried to solve before, because no one had ever imagined that solving them might matter. The Imperium watched this growth with fury that burned hotter than any star. They had lost control of the narrative, lost the ability to define what Draconis and humans could be to each other. And they knew that if this infection spread much further, their entire civilization might transform into something they could not control. The High Council of Pirith Prime made a decision that had been made many times before in Draconis history. They would burn the contamination away. The war fleet that gathered in orbit around their homeworld was the largest ever assembled. Hundreds of ships carrying enough firepower to reduce a planet to glass. And their target was a single frozen world where a community of heretics dared to imagine a different future. When Elias received the warning from his smuggler contacts, he gathered everyone in the central chamber of what had become their shared home. Humans and Draconis stood together, packed into a space that should not have held so many, and looked at the man who had accidentally started something that might get them all killed. "They are coming to destroy us," Elias said, because he had never believed in softening bad news. "The entire Imperium war fleet. They will be here in 3 days." Fear rippled through the crowd, but so did something else. Something that felt like defiance. "We can fight," said a human veteran named Chun, who had been one of the first refugees to arrive. "We cannot win," said a Draconis scholar named Vareth, who had been studying under Thessaly. "Not against that many ships." Elias looked at Cirith, standing beside him as she had stood since the night she woke in his hideout, and he saw something in her eyes that made him believe in impossible things. "Maybe we do not have to win," he said. "Maybe we just have to be heard." He spent the next 12 hours building something new, a transmission array that combined human communication technology with Draconis bioresonance frequencies. Something that could broadcast to every ship in the approaching fleet and every receiver in both civilizations. When the array was ready, he sat down in front of it and spoke to 2 species at once. "I am not a soldier," he said, his voice carrying across the void of space to reach ears that had never listened to someone like him. "I am not a leader or a hero or anything special at all. I am just a man who found a broken dragon in the snow and decided that helping her mattered more than hating her." He paused, and across the gulf between stars, millions of beings listened. "One choice," he said. "That is all it took. One moment when I decided to see a person instead of an enemy, and look what grew from it. A community where humans and Draconis live and work and learn together, where children of both species play in the same corridors, where fire warms instead of burns." His voice grew stronger, carrying emotion he did not try to hide. If one choice could create this, imagine what 1,000 such choices might build. Imagine 1,000,000 people deciding that the being standing next to them deserves a chance. Imagine what we could become if we stopped burning each other long enough to try. He looked directly into the transmitter, speaking to an empire that wanted him dead. "You can destroy us," he said. "Your fleet is vast and our defenses are small, and you will probably succeed in wiping us from existence. But you cannot destroy what we have proven. You cannot burn away the truth that your fire was never meant only to kill. It was always capable of warming those who needed warmth." The transmission ended, and the silence that followed. The war fleet continued its approach, vast and terrible and seemingly unstoppable. And then, one ship stopped. It was a small vessel, a scoutcraft crewed by young Draconis, who had heard stories and asked questions and wondered if there might be more to existence than endless war. They stopped, and they turned, and they broadcast their own message. "We will not burn fellow beings who seek only peace." Another ship stopped, and another, and soon the fleet that had seemed so unified began to fracture as Draconis warriors made choices that their commanders had never anticipated. Not everyone stopped. Many continued toward their target, with flames burning bright and hearts full of righteous fury. But enough hesitated, enough questioned, enough chose differently. The moment did not last long. Perhaps a few hours before order was restored and the dissenting ships were called to account. But a few hours was enough. The Imperium had shown weakness, had revealed that its control was not absolute, and every being in both civilizations saw it happen. The war would not end today, but something had changed, something fundamental, something that could not be changed back. And in his little hideout on a frozen world at the edge of nowhere, Ilias sat with Cirith and watched the stars and knew that whatever came next, they had already won something that mattered more than survival. They had proven that change was possible. The rest was just a matter of time. 1 year after the broadcast that shook 2 civilizations, the frozen world of Kepler 442b looked nothing like it had before. The small underground hideout where Elias had once lived alone had grown into a sprawling complex that stretched across the glacier. A hybrid city built from human ingenuity and Draconis engineering that should have been impossible, but existed anyway. They called it Haven, because that was what it had become. The war had not ended, but it had changed, fragmenting into 1,000 smaller conflicts as the Draconis Imperium struggled to maintain control over subjects who had started asking questions. Some worlds burned, consumed by the fury of those who refused to accept change, but others quietly reached out across the void to make contact with Haven and the movement. It represented human frontier colonies that had been abandoned by Earth's military found themselves receiving visitors with scales and wings who came not to conquer but to trade, to learn, to simply exist in peace for the first time in their long lives. Draconis who fled the Imperium found sanctuary among people their ancestors had taught them to hate, and discovered that hatred was a choice that could be unmade. It was not easy, and it was not clean. Old grudges did not vanish overnight, and there were fights and misunderstandings and moments when everything threatened to fall apart. But the people of Haven learned to work through their conflicts instead of burning their way past them. And slowly, painfully, they built something new. Elias never became a politician or a general. Despite the many times people tried to push him into those roles, he remained what he had always been, an engineer and a teacher, and a stubborn man who refused to give up on problems that everyone else called unsolvable. His workshop became a school, where Draconis apprentices learned the art of human improvisation, the ability to make things work with whatever materials were available. And human students learned the precision and elegance of Draconis engineering. The hybrid technologies they created together were better than anything either species had produced alone. Machines and systems that combined the best qualities of 2 civilizations that had spent generations trying to destroy each other. Cirith became something unprecedented in all of recorded history, a bridge between worlds that had never been connected. Before her flame burned in a way no Draconis flame had ever burned, with the ability to destroy when necessary, but also to warm and to heal and to protect. Scientists from both species studied her endlessly, trying to understand what had happened when Elias's blood had touched her dying flame core, but they could not replicate it no matter how hard they tried. It was not the blood. Thessaly said one evening, sitting with Cirith in a garden that had been built beneath the ice, where plants from a dozen worlds grew together in harmony. The blood was just a catalyst. What really changed you was the choice. Cirith considered this, watching a Draconis child play with a human child in the artificial sunlight, their laughter mixing together in a sound that had never existed before. The choice to save me, she said. The choice to see you as someone worth saving, Thessaly corrected. Elias looked at a dying enemy and saw a person in need. That is a kind of power our people have never understood. A fire that does not consume, but creates. Cirith thought about all the choices that had followed that first one. The choice to heal her. The choice to fight beside her. The choice to believe that what they were building mattered more than what they were leaving behind. "Do you think we can truly change things?" she asked. "The Imperium is vast and old and powerful. They will not. Stop trying to destroy what we have built." Thessaly smiled, and there was ancient wisdom in her eyes that came from a lifetime of studying truths that most Draconists preferred to ignore. "They are already changed," she said. "Every time a young warrior asks a question, every time a ship refuses to fire on civilians, every time someone chooses mercy when they could have chosen destruction, the Imperium loses a piece of what it used to be. You cannot burn an idea, Sirith. You can only give people the choice to embrace it or reject it. The Imperium did keep sending assassins and war fleets and threats of annihilation. But they were fighting something they could not understand. Every attack made them look like the monsters Haven claimed they were. Every survivor who escaped to tell their story brought new converts to the cause. Every year that passed saw more Draconists questioning the old ways and more humans reaching out across the divide that had separated them for generations. It was slow work. The kind of change that happened across decades rather than days. But it was happening in the 5th year after the broadcast. The first official treaty was signed between a human colony and a Draconist faction that had broken away from the Imperium in the 10th year. Intermarriage became common enough that no one remarked on it anymore in the 20th year. The children who had been born in Haven began to take their place in both societies, bringing with them ideas and connections that their parents could never have imagined. Elias watched it all from his workshop, growing older but never quite retiring, always finding one more problem to solve or one more student to teach. He had gray in his hair now and lines on his face that came from years of work and worry, but his eyes still held the same stubborn light that had made him drag a dying dragon out of the snow so many years ago. Sirith found him there on a quiet evening, sitting outside the entrance to his original hideout, watching a transport ship descend through the atmosphere. Her wings had grown stronger over the years, developing patterns and colors that had never been seen on any Draconist before, and her flame burned steady and warm as she settled beside him. "You changed everything," she said, echoing words she had spoken many times before. Elias shook his head, the same denial he always gave. "I just made a choice," he said. "You changed everything." Sirith considered this as she always did, turning the truth over in her mind like a gemstone catching light from different angles. "Perhaps we both did," she said finally. "Perhaps that is the whole point, that it takes more than one to start a fire that warms instead of burns." They watched the ship land together, a cargo vessel carrying medical supplies from a human world, engineering students from a Draconist academy that had broken with the Imperium, and a Draconist poet who had traveled across the galaxy to write about the place where impossible things had become ordinary. The poet's name was Ashko, and she had come to document the story of Haven for future generations. When she asked Elias what he wanted people to remember about him, he thought for a long moment before answering. "I want them to remember that it started with one choice," he said. "One moment when someone decided to help instead of hate, to heal instead of harm, to believe that the universe could be bigger than the war they were born into." He looked at Sirith, and even after all these years, there was wonder in his eyes when he saw her. "I want them to remember that you were dying in the snow, and I brought you home, and neither of us knew what that meant, but we trusted it anyway." Sirith reached out and took his hand in her clawed grip, as gently as she had learned to be over years of practice. "They will remember," she said, "and they will make their own choices. And some of those choices will be wrong, but some of them will be exactly right. And those are the ones that will matter." The sun set behind the glacier, painting the ice in shades of gold and purple that looked almost like fire. And the people of Haven went about their lives in the city that had grown from nothing but one stubborn man and one broken dragon. The war was not over, and perhaps it never would be entirely, because old hatreds had deep roots that took generations to dig out. But the future was strange and frightening and full of teeth, and for the first time in either of their lives, it also felt warm, and that warmth, born from one impossible choice on a frozen night so many years ago, continued to spread outward like ripples in a pond, touching lives and changing minds and proving again and again that the greatest power in the universe was not the ability to destroy. It was the willingness to help someone who needed help. Even when every voice in your head told you to walk away,